Welcome to Forest for Monarchs, Saving Butterflies, where we explore the journey of monarch butterflies, the forests that sustain them, and the people working to protect these natural wonders. Welcome to the second episode of our podcast. I'm Megan Fulton, Executive Director of Forest for Monarchs. And if you're new here, make sure to check out episode 1 to learn more about our work and mission. Today, we're joined by Mark D. Hunter, the Dean of the Odum School of Ecology at the University of Georgia. Prior to that, he served as the Earl E. Werner Distinguished University Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Michigan. Mark's research spans a wide range of topics, including pollinator declines, forest ecology, environmental change, and biodiversity. He's published over 170 research articles and written or edited 6 books. He has also served on Forest for Monarchs board since 2022. So let's get started with today's conversation. Mark, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to talk all things monarchs. And so today, for those listening, we're really going to focus on understanding monarch butterflies, what makes them tick, what's needed to help protect them. And one of the first things I think I want to ask you, Mark, and I think is good to clear up with the general public is most people can recognize the monarch butterfly. But what are some of the most important things that people should know about the monarch? And maybe what are some of the common mistakes when people think they're seeing a monarch? Maybe it's not actually a monarch.
Sure, I think it is lovely. What a wonderful thing that there is an insect that most people can recognize in the US. I think that's lovely.
Mhm.
So one of the first things I would say that we should all know about the monarchs is it's not just in the US. They're spread in a variety of parts of the world, including Australia and New Zealand, southern Spain, northern parts of Africa, into Portugal, Southeast Asia. I think that's lovely. I think the idea that we might be out with our family and see monarch butterflies, and right the way across the world, in Indonesia, another family's out and they're able to see monarch butterflies as well. So it's just that kind of global perspective of wonder at this particular insect, I think, is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
What else should we know? Migration. I think everybody who spent a bit of time thinking about monarch butterflies, one of the first things we learn about is this incredible migration, particularly here in the US, where populations east of the Rockies can fly all the way from Canada down into Mexico to spend the winter.
Mhm.
So knowing a bit about the migration, I think. And then the final one is related to, how do you identify a monarch? What does it look like? And one of the reasons it looks the way it does, that very striking bright color, is a defense mechanism. It's advertising the fact that it doesn't taste very good. And one of the ways that animals do that, if you're a wasp, for example, you've got black and yellow stripes. For monarchs, it's that bright orange and black coloration advertises that it's distasteful to eat. And of course, that helps us identify them because we see those colors.
And speaking to how famous the monarch is, obviously their migration or their population loss is garnering a lot of attention in the public. Within the mainstream media, people are starting to pay attention to it, and we now know there's been the proposal for listing them as threatened. How does all of this attention help the monarchs and pollinators in general?
I tend to believe that, getting people's attention is half the battle in any conservation program. Is if folks don't know the importance of something, we're all busy with lots and lots of things we have to do during the course of a day. Butterflies might not come top of that list, right? Pollinators might not. But if everybody loves monarchs, it really does shine a spotlight on pollinators more generally. And when we go to advertise, with the public, be it at schools or churches or wherever we hang out to talk monarchs with folks, we always make the point that monarchs are just one of many pollinators. And if we can get people thinking about pollinators and the important roles that they play, the proportion of the US food that's dependent on pollinators, then perhaps we can tie the monarch to the pollinator issue and just get people to care more about pollination in general.
Yeah, that's very true. And with that, would you say, is there a negative to all of the attention, or Do you think generally it stays positive, the effects?
I haven't really seen much in the way of negative association
Mm,
by spending time thinking about monarchs. I mean, I suppose one could argue that if they get too much of the attention, the other pollinators don't get any.
yeah.
But a lot of the conservation that we might put in place for monarch butterflies are going to help other kinds of pollinators as well.
Okay.
And from that point of view, even if we're focused heavily on monarchs, by the very nature of the actions we take, we're likely to increase the resilience of other pollinator species too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you had already mentioned the migration that the eastern monarchs take. Why is preserving the migration route so important for biodiversity?
I think there are two real answers to that question. Um, One is that when a species is widely distributed in space, so it lives in lots of different places,
Mhm.
it really reduces the probability of it going extinct.
Okay.
So if something occurs in lots of different habitats or in lots of different areas of the country, it's very unlikely that a single event,
Mhm.
like a flood or a hurricane, um, or a fire is going to kill off the entire population. Whereas if it's all localized in one place, actually the risk is quite high of a single event causing a catastrophic mortality for the species. So the fact that the monarch migrates over such great distances means that there are populations in Michigan and Kansas, in Texas and Louisiana and Florida. And so the probability of all of those being affected at the one time is very low. So there's enormous resilience in a species because that's widely distributed in that fashion. I think the other reason is something we've been talking about so far is that everywhere the monarch goes, people notice it. The important reasons to maintain the migration is to maintain that monarch human contact, that point, that beautiful point of contact between school kids and butterflies or teachers and butterflies. I think that would be a shame if we lost that all the way north up into Canada.
And what happens if and is this even a possibility? What happens if monarchs stop migrating?
It certainly is a possibility. And the big danger to me would be one of, we saw recently some devastating consequences of some major storms in the southeastern part of the United States. A couple of really heavy storms hit. We've seen the devastating impacts of fires in other parts of the US. So if the monarchs stop migrating, and most of them are in a relatively small area of land, let's say in Florida or perhaps Louisiana or Texas, uh, and something tragic, a big storm, a hurricane happened there, we could literally lose them all. I think there are other consequences in terms of disease dynamics, but maybe we can talk about that a bit later if we have time.
There's been some debate about the historic high numbers of the monarch population. Um, how has past expansion and now present contracting of agriculture in the US and Canada impacted the migration route and or how has it impacted the population decline?
There is no doubt that agricultural expansion has played a huge role in increasing monarch populations uh, over, the last 150 to 200 years. In many ways, we can think of milkweed as being sort of weedy species that do really well at the edges of places. So old fields, edges of fields have been absolutely prime habitat for milkweed plants
Mhm.
monarchs require.
Yeah.
So as agriculture expanded, there was lots of open area and lots of area um, for milkweed plants to grow. In part, it's contraction of agriculture, but more it's changes in agricultural practices. I think there are unintended consequences.
Okay.
The farmers I talk to um, have absolutely no desire to see the loss of monarch butterflies or any other pollinator from their landscapes.
Yeah.
Farmers recognize the value of pollination services.
Mhm.
But we have a farming system now that tends to rely on control measures, herbicides that remove beneficial plants from the edges of fields. I think there could be some work done there where we just allow yard or two at the edge of fields or around field margins to be left alone. And I think if we even did that, um, the populations of monarchs would be in much better shape than they are today.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that I think it's easy for people to think that the expansion and the amount of farming that we have now is the problem, but really it's, as you said, the unintended consequences, the practices, what we're doing could change slightly, and just that little bit of extra space can help the monarchs and other
Yeah.
pollinators.
I did a lot of work on monarch butterflies up in Emmett County, Michigan. And Emmett County, Michigan is really interesting. It used to be a place where people collected um, seed pods from milkweed to make life preservers back in the 30s and 40s. And so kids would get paid, a nickel per bag of milkweed pods, and they would use the silk on the inside to make life preservers. Massive populations.
Yeah.
And when I first started working up there in mid 2000s, I could go out in an afternoon and find hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars
Mhm.
feeding on milkweed at the edge of fields. 10 years later, it was hard to find any at all. The fields were still there, the agriculture was still there, but the practices around the edges of those fields had changed sufficiently that the monarch populations had absolutely crashed.
Wow, that's an amazing example, and I think that speaks to what we're seeing. So, why is milkweed essential for monarchs, and what should people know about gardening with milkweed? Because I know that's a question that comes up a lot.
So the importance of milkweed is it's really interesting. Almost all insects that feed on plants
Mhm.
feed on one or two species alone. It's an amazing fact that about 80% of all the insects that feed on plants feed only on a single species. What that really means for the monarch caterpillar in particular, the larval stage, the caterpillar, is if it's not milkweed, it might as well be concrete, right? There's no difference between something being concrete or some other plant as far as a monarch caterpillar is concerned.
Okay.
So milkweed is absolutely essential for that. And they have this nice little genetic trick that allows them to feed on milkweed without being poisoned. Whereas if you and I were to spend an afternoon eating nothing but milkweed, we'd get pretty sick. Monarch caterpillars, not so much. They have that trick in place. So that's why they're tightly linked together. In terms of gardening with milkweed, there's really only one rule, which is uh, plant as many of the local milkweed species as you can for the area that you have available. If it's in your schoolyard, your churchyard, if you're lucky enough to have a piece of land associated with where you live,
Mhm.
plant the milkweed that is native to the area in which you live, and plant diversity or as many different species of milkweed as you can. Generally, there are, 3, 4, 5 species of milkweed that will be native to the area in which you live. If you can plant all of them, it allows monarch mothers to choose where they lay their eggs. And monarch mums are amazingly good at making choices. High nutrients, um, with antibiotics even in the foliage of the plants. So in order to let mom do her job, you really want to give her a diversity of milkweed species native to the area in which you live.
And I know sometimes this comes up, and we have a resource on our website actually that you helped create, where folks can go and find good resources for finding milkweed native to their area. What are some risks, or what happens if someone plants the wrong type of milkweed for their area? Because I know sometimes people do find different varieties and plop them in their yard, well intentioned.
Yeah, and again, this is a thing where the sale of milkweed and milkweed seeds is not restricted. So you can buy milkweed from all. You can even buy milkweed from overseas and plant it. It's a very, very dangerous thing to do
Mhm.
because unfortunately, when you bring a milkweed in that's not native to the area, it influences the probability that the monarchs will get a disease
Okay.
because the transmission of disease is intimately related to the chemistry of plants that they eat. So if you're putting a non-native plant there, you're changing the probability of your monarch caterpillars getting sick.
Okay.
Second is a lot of the milkweeds and from tropical areas, if we have a warm winter, they don't die back. And if there's above ground tissue, like tissue showing above the soil, monarchs are less likely to leave into that situation where you can interrupt the migration because you have plants living through the winter.
So there's actually quite, I would say, large consequences to the having the wrong species planted.
Yeah, I mean, if our listeners take one message away from today's podcast, it's please plant native milkweed, native to where you live.
How is the overall health of the population? And what are some of the issues that they face regarding their health?
Well, I think you may be aware that we've had the second lowest, recently had the second lowest monarch count in history, suggesting that the monarch populations are not doing very well. There are a variety of reasons for that. Um, Scientists argue about what those reasons are. There's differences of opinion. Chances are, as usual, it's not one thing, right? It's probably a mixture of things. And I imagine that Jose Luis has a lot to say about that too. But farming practices in Michigan, from nectar plants on the migration route to certain kinds of chemicals we might use in our yards, all the way down to the health of the overwintering grounds in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
All of these matter to the monarch. So the populations are pretty low. Um, in terms of health of the actual individuals, there are lots of things that will attack monarch butterflies. They have enemies, but one of the major ones is this protozoan disease. Your listeners may have heard of OE, which is this kind of protozoan disease that attacks monarch butterflies. And that probably is one of the ones that worries me the most in terms of monarch health overall.
Can you talk more to that? That's considered a disease or a pest or a combination?
It's definitely a disease. So you would describe it as a monarch disease. Believe it or not, it's actually distantly related to malaria. It's in the same phylum of disease agents as malaria. Um,
Interesting.
but it's a long distance relative of malaria. And it causes monarchs to grow slower. They can't fly as far. They're smaller. They don't have as many offspring. Don't have as many lay as many eggs. Certainly, their ability to migrate is compromised. And the last thing you want in a migratory animal is a disease that influences how far you can travel. Um, and that's another consequence really of sedentary monarch populations. The idea that if we plant the wrong milkweed and the monarchs hang around, the prevalence of the disease goes up. Levels go up when monarchs are sedentary. Very simple reason from that. If I leave from Canada to fly to Mexico and I've got a virulent strain of the pathogen, I'm not going to make it. I'm actually going to die on the way, and so is the parasite. That's the
Oh,
important. The parasite dies when the monarch dies. They're sedentary and they're not going anywhere. Those parasite populations can build up and build up and build up.
and so that actually leads to my next question of sedentary populations. I think some listeners might be surprised that there are monarchs that don't migrate. So how can those sedentary populations impact those migrating monarchs, and how do they interact with each other? Do they not interact? Can you talk more about that?
So we're back in this business of the milkweed plants persisting through the winter. So there are parts of the US where it doesn't freeze very often or may not freeze at all.
Mhm.
And so milkweed tends not to be, freeze resistant, but in areas where we have mild winters, we can have a milkweed around all winter long.
Okay.
Under those circumstances, monarch populations can build up and stay all year. There's something for them to feed on all year. There's no cue that says no food left, better fly south. Now, the problem is if we've got a population like that in the southern part of the United States that's now sedentary, the migrating monarchs come down from the north
Mhm.
and they'll stop to feed on nectar on the way. They'll encounter a sedentary population. Now, the first thing is there's something for their caterpillars to eat,
Mhm.
but the interaction between the butterflies seems to bring the monarch butterflies back out of what we call a sexual diapause. The idea that I'm not going to breed again this year. I'm going to go hang out in Mexico. I'll start breeding again next year. Sexual diapause, a period where I'm not going to mate and have offspring.
Mhm.
But suddenly they're encountering this other group of butterflies that are there all year long, and some cue or other seems to say, come out of sexual diapause. There's food to eat, uh, and you get the situation where the migrating monarchs start to hang out with the sedentary populations. And the problem is now we've got disease transmission from the migratory populations to the sedentary populations back and forward. And remember, I said that if the sedentary populations are building up this high incidence of disease, this protozoan parasite, now my migrants are going to start picking it up. Whether they leave again or not, they're more likely to pick it up.
So with some of those diseases, is there a way for people to prevent that, or is it really come down to making sure you have the right species? Or yeah, I guess how would you know as a gardener to prevent that or signs?
So earlier, I suggested that we plant as many different kinds of milkweed native to the area.
Hmm.
So if we do that, that's us done our job,
Oh.
because what monarch mothers are able to do is they're able to detect whether or not they are infected with the protozoan parasite.
Mhm.
And if they are infected, they will choose the milkweed that has the highest levels of antibiotics in it. Caterpillars hatch out. The first thing they eat is a nice little dose of medicine. When we interrupt the mother monarch's ability to do that, the consequences are higher levels of parasitism and the potential for virulent strains of the parasite to evolve. So the
Okay.
best thing is just moms know best. That's generally my mantra here. Mom knows best. All we need to do, our job is just to plant that diversity of milkweeds and let her make the decisions.
Aside from the interacting with the sedentary populations, is there anything else that might cause the migrating monarch to become sedentary, to stop the migration completely?
It's kind of like showing up at an all you can eat diner
Mhm.
late at night. If that diner's open all night, all day, your incentive to leave is much lower. And I think whenever we put monarch populations in a situation where the food is there year round, it greatly increases the probability that they will stay.
Okay.
So as the climate has gotten warmer, it tends to mean that some of the tropical species of milkweed that are not native
Mhm.
to the US, if people plant them in their gardens, they'll be there all year long, and the monarchs will just start hanging out there. And so, what we're really trying to encourage people to do is just make sure that if you think you want to have some exotic milkweed as a showy plant
Mhm.
in your yard, absolutely cut it back to the ground in the winter.
With that, with the decline, with these impacts to the migration, um, how is the loss potentially of the migrating monarch impact work for other pollinators, the attention to other pollinators?
I see this as one big story that we're all involved in, as a community of humans on Earth who rely on plants for food, for fiber, for a sense of well-being, for cultural reasons, for just downright beauty.
Mhm.
We have a responsibility to maintain these systems. None of those systems will be maintained without pollinators and pollination services. 90%. 90% of the flowering plants on Earth require an animal to pollinate it. So imagine walking out your door one day and 90% of the world's plants are gone. Any attention we can draw to that, whether it's through attention to monarch butterflies, their migration, just their simple beauty, if we
Mhm.
can bring people's attention to pollination, the importance of pollinators and pollinator conservation, that's fine by me. And as I said earlier on, many of the strategies we might take, planting nectaring plants in our schoolyards, in our churches, if we're lucky enough to have a plot of land at home, plant something for nectar feeding insects, including the monarch to feed on, and then we're all doing our part.
Are there any last sort of tips or thoughts that you have that someone should know if they're listening and they're maybe feeling like, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? What would your tip or your trick be for them?
Oh, I'm a huge optimist, absolutely huge optimist. Truly, if 10% of the folks who listen to this go out and plant milkweed, uh, or any other plants that are flowering that nectar feeding insects can feed on, we will make a difference. Um, Bit by bit, garden by garden, churchyard by churchyard, linked together across the landscape, across the United States. My goodness, we can absolutely do this. If we all just do a little bit, that'll be absolutely fine.
Thank you. That's been the theme that I think I've been hearing is we all can do at least one thing, and that'll all add up to something. So thank you so much for your time. I hope for everyone listening, this has been a very informative episode, and you'll be hearing from Jose Luis a little bit later about what's happening in Mexico related to the monarchs. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for taking time to speak with me.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning into Forest for Monarchs Saving Butterflies, where we connect conservation, culture, and collaboration to safeguard the monarch migration and the habitats they call home. To learn more about our work, visit our website at www.forestformonarchs.org. If you missed our first episode, Jose Luis Alvarez is the founder of Forest for Monarchs. He also oversees and manages all of our operations in Mexico, including the nursery where the trees grow with the support of our donors and partners, and where those trees are nurtured. You too can become a donor at forestformonarchs.org/donate. Every dollar donated plants one tree. And so I am happy to welcome back to the podcast Jose Luis Alvarez.
Good morning, Megan, and good morning to the public.
Yeah, so we're just going to dive right into the questions. And as you just heard from Mark Hunter, we focused a lot on monarch migrations and what that means in the US with the sedentary population. So now we're going to switch gears and focus a bit more on the monarchs in Mexico. So, Jose, how has deforestation in the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve and the buffer zone impacted the monarchs' ability to survive the season in Mexico and also their migration?
As far as the forest in Mexico, most of the illegal logging has stopped. Okay? And besides that, there have been new nurseries that are producing trees for that area. Not only myself. When I started 27 years ago, I was the only one that was producing trees and giving trees away for that area. Now there are other nurseries in the area that belong to the owners of this land. And Rosario has its own tree nursery, and there's several other tree nurseries and people that are growing trees. In Mexico, in the nucleus, there's been also insect damage to the trees. Now, as I said, there are more nurseries now producing trees and planting in the area. But it's not only the nucleus or the buffer, it's in general, the whole area needs to be reforested now that they've done quite a good job in the nucleus. You have to attack the buffer. And as you know, one of the strategies of this whole project is we started by planting in the nucleus, okay, which is basically where they overwinter. But then from there on, we decided that we would plant the buffer and also below the buffer. Why? Because this gives people an alternative site to extract wood. You have to remember, these people for generations cook with wood, they build their homes with wood, and if they have some financial problem, they're not farmers, they're foresters. They live in the forest. So they will cut some trees, sell them, and with that, they will have money or income to buy whatever they need, whether it be medicine for the children or food for the table or whatever it may be. So basically, what we're doing now is we're not planting that much in the nucleus, or basically not at all. We're planting in the buffer and below the buffer, right?
Yeah, and what would you say based on that are the long-term effects on deforestation in the region? What are some, I know you briefly touched on insects. I don't know if you can talk a bit more about that and then other effects from deforestation that you've seen.
Well, one of the major problems, and it's not only in the overwintering sites, or it's not only the problem in Mexico. I think this is a problem that's worldwide, which is climate change. With climate change, sometimes you don't have enough a long enough cold season to attack these insects. Okay, or you may have a very long rainy season, or you may not have a rainy season. So you don't know anymore really what the weather is like, and naturally, this affects the nature of the forest.
And you're also seeing an increase, would you say, in forest fires, or has that been about the same? I've heard, some people questioning that.
Well, it depends on, again, on the rainy seasons. If it rains, usually right now in March, it starts to rain a little bit, just once in a while. March and April rains a little bit, which helps a lot for combating the forest fires. But we might get a season where it doesn't rain a bit. It's only a bit. It's not a lot. Huh? And it might rain. It might start raining until May or June. So the critical months for forest fires are now, which is March and April. This is the driest season. March, April, May. Okay. This is critical now. But if we have a good rainy season, sometimes the rainy season will go on for even 2 or 3 months longer than usual. The thing is, climate change has changed the seasons, the rainy season. Uh, it's changed everything, basically.
What else is being done in Mexico to save the eastern monarch population or help with conservation efforts aside from reforestation? What other efforts are you seeing in the region?
Well, there's good management as far as the tourist industry. Okay, you have to remember the tourist industry basically started with this great demand of seeing them maybe 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, the people didn't have a specific way of visiting them, the monarchs. In other words, they would just sometimes drive up, sometimes they would even camp in the sites. And so it wasn't organized. Now it's extremely organized. And the people that take you up to visit, the guides that take you, know a lot about it. They've taken courses or they've been educated to know the life cycle of the monarchs, to know everything that's possible. So they'll give you a very good explanation, and they will respect the rules would be respected. In other words, not to make a lot of noise, not to run and lift a lot of dust, because dust is a problem. The dust, because it's very dry. And so basically, these guys have been educated for the last 10 years, I guess, and now they're very organized, and the trails are in very good shape. They're guided trails. You can't go up like you used to and just go anywhere you want and do anything you want. In other words, everything is very controlled, and that's helped very much because they only give you a limited area that you can visit, and you can't get up close to the trees anymore. There's a rope that stops you from getting under the butterflies, and so this helps a lot, And besides that, it's teaching people, right, how to respect and how to be able to help these monarchs and their overwintering sites. Also, they don't eat while they're here during these 4 or 5 months or 6 months, whatever it might take. Sometimes it's 5 months, sometimes 5 months and a half. It depends. They only rehydrate themselves. They'll fly down, they'll drink water, and then they'll fly back. That's all they do. So the drinking places, or they're like little streams or just wet patches, those are being protected as well, to where before they would come down and drink and people would come by and try to catch them or play with them or walk in the puddles, and that's controlled as well. So there's a lot of control in overwintering sites in these areas, and there's reforestation that's being done, but there's still a lot to do. As far as reforestation, there's still a lot of area that needs to be planted. As I said, the buffer zone and below the buffer zone are very important. If you have a good buffer zone and you have good tree plantations in that area, this will keep people away from the natural forest, where they can actually cut the wood and they can build their homes with wood, and they can use the wood for firewood, for for cooking, etc. So you have to have a good nucleus. You have to have a good buffer zone, and you have to have areas below the buffer zone as well that were once forest and that were transformed into agricultural land. They must go back to their original state, which is forest.
And would you say for anyone listening, because sometimes I think I've heard some questions of people questioning ecotourism and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. What do you hear from the communities who run the tourism, or how would you, and because you also do tours, um, do you find that it's actually more sustainable for people to come down and tour versus not?
Well, I think it's more sustainable if it's done correctly. And as I said, it's taken years for them to educate the people that live and surround these areas. And these people are very conscious now that ecotourism is much better than cutting trees, right? Because they're having an income from the tourism, and their lives are much better. A lot of these people had to migrate to Mexico City because there's no jobs in the area. Now with the ecotourism, they're staying home. They take care of their children. Sometimes it was only the women that would go. They would migrate to Mexico City as domestic workers. And the men were the ones that stayed home and took care of the children. Now this has changed. Because of tourism, they have money coming in during these 5 months or 6 months. They have revenue. No need for them to go to Mexico City and break up these families. So there's a better family union. There's a better understanding. And of course, income is very important. The tourist income, the tourist, everything that comes with it
Yeah.
is very helpful to these people in these areas.
No, that's great, and I think that speaks to sort of the well-rounded, the full circle of the economics of the region, that it's the trees aren't just trees, it's not just about the monarchs, it's everything, it's the people, it's the climate, it's all interconnected, and we need it all to be symbiotic to work. And with
Correct.
talking about these communities, how have you seen over the last nearly 30 years these communities sort of take on this role of guardians of the monarchs? How have you seen that play out?
Well, as I said in the beginning, 20 or 28 years ago, no one was really interested in this. In fact, nobody knew much about why they came to this specific area. It was a mystery to Urquhart, which he finally found where they overwintered. It was a mystery for Lincoln, and the people in that area where they overwintered really didn't understand. They only knew that they came exactly on the Day of the Dead, which is the 1st of November, and that they left as soon as spring started, which was the 21st of March. In some areas, people thought that they were insects that were going to destroy the trees, and so they would fumigate and kill the butterflies. There wasn't much knowledge, okay, 30 years ago. And now, of course, there are protected species. Are educated in the schools, they respect them. They know that it's a source of income if the area is clean and if the forests are in good shape. They're protecting them, and they understand, and they're educated now to take care of this phenomenon.
And just one last question: if the monarchs cease to exist or they stop migrating, what would that impact be on this region in Mexico?
Well, it would be tremendous because tourism now is one of the basic ways of making a living in this area. So they would probably have to go back to uh, Mexico City to work. A lot of them are masons, and the men and the women are domestic workers. So they would probably have to go back to that system. And I think they would start to re-exploit or cut the forest with no permits, just illegally.
Yeah. So I think that all, shows us why it's so important to protect this insect. Again, we say the monarchs aren't necessarily the most, important for our food and things like that, but they're really symbolic of the larger issues with our ecosystems and the connectedness, the interconnectedness of everything. So it's really crucial for us to help save this species, because it really leads to the larger issues at hand with our climate and ecosystem. Anything lastly you would want people to know about efforts in Mexico or the Monarchs when they're in Mexico before we sign off?
Well, I think that it's a common goal for the United States, Canada, and Mexico to take care of the monarch butterfly. So we'll do our work here as far as reforestation and education. And you in the United States and Canada have to do your work having milkweed and having nectar plants so they can be reproduced.
You for joining us again, Jose Luis. We are so grateful to you, our listeners, and to our donors and funding partners. As a small nonprofit, we rely on your support to continue our work. So if you like what you've been hearing and want to help, visit our website, www.forestformonarchs.org/donate to make a donation today. And as I said earlier, every dollar plants one tree, and your contribution will go right to work. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.